Chapter 104, Remembering, Antony's POV. Titus, the wide-eyed adolescent whose hand shook when the king brought him before the court to demand that he try another diet, another training regimen. Titus, the gentle child who had cheerfully told Felix that they were bastards and didn't count. Titus, the hard-faced soldier who laughed about the cynical culling of humans on his ship. Titus, the squirming, squalling newborn who had felt so terrifyingly light in Antony's arms. No one had expected him to be born. It was considered to be in poor taste for a king to actually reproduce with a concubine when there were so many spells and medicines to prevent conception. Antony and Claudia were scandal enough, but when Cassia fell pregnant a second time, the court descended into an uproar. The consort had mentioned that old shock and horror a few times in their hearing. So had the crown prince, for years after the fact, though she never brought it up when Titus was actually around, always saving her venom for Antony and Claudia. The barb had never landed as deeply as she'd hoped. It was simply a fact of their young lives. No one but the king really knew why they had been born, and the king never saw fit to enlighten them. Cassia's own reason had been blessedly simple. She had always wanted children. She came from a large, close-knit peasant family, and when the king took her as one of his concubines, part of their arrangement had been that he would support her relatives so long as she never contacted them. Cut off as she was from her siblings and their children, she had been delighted with her own brood, no matter what lurid rumors the court swapped about what she must have done to get King Octavius's permission to bear them. Antony hadn't known about any of the gossip or scandal as it happened, of course. He'd been only 8 or 9 at the time. When their mother had told him and Claudia that she was expecting, he had been elated. Claudia had been more skeptical. Knowing her, she'd probably been picking up on the mood of the court far earlier than Antony, but she'd grown more excited as Cassia's belly swelled and Antony and Theodora fantasized about the coming addition to their family. The day their mother called them over to feel him kicking inside her, Claudia had finally melted, squealing that she couldn't wait to meet the baby. Antony wished now that he could remember specifics. He wished he could recall debating names and imagining the baby's eventual hobbies with Claudia and Theo, but it was too long ago. In his mind, it was all just a haze of hot, sticky summer afternoons and the conviction that the 3 of them were going to be the best big siblings in the world and protect the baby from everything. And look how that turned out. Sometimes Antony wondered if, after the murder of his mother and husband, the breakdown of his relationships with his brother and sister had been the most personally painful part of the curse. They wrote each other regularly. Well, they had up until now, and their notes were chatty and kind, but the intimacy was gone. Even in his renewed relationship with Theo, there was so much he'd never said, and it festered. But how could someone apologize for all he'd done? He'd gotten them cursed. He'd killed their mother. He'd caused every moment of suffering they'd experienced for the last 1,000 years. Whatever had happened to make the letters stop and leave Titus's ship docked at this forsaken island, Antony had caused that too. And now he was dithering helplessly in his room while his brother's ship sat a scant bowshot away, as inaccessible as if it had been docked on the moon. He would have been falling apart if it weren't for Marcus. Marcus's hand was huge and reassuring on Antony's shoulder. Ordinarily, Antony hated his lover's habit of steering him when they walked, but at the moment he wasn't sure that either he or Theo could have been trusted to make their way to his rooms. Once they were there, Marcus maneuvered Antony onto the sofa. Theo slumped down beside him a second later and took his hand. He could almost feel their shared dread crackling through their clasping fingers. Their fingers had overlapped like this on Cassia's belly the day they first felt Titus kicking. He's nearly as much her brother as mine. What if he's dead? What if I squandered 1,000 years' worth of chances to make things right between us, and now my time has run out? At the sensation of warm pressure against his knees, Antony opened his eyes, hoping distantly that his panic didn't show. Hanyu was kneeling at his feet, his hands resting on Antony's knees and his face turned up towards him. Had those big brown eyes always been so kind? Had Antony just failed to see it? Hanyu's tender gaze was like an embrace, and as soon as Antony saw it, his whole body ached for a real one. He longed to sag forward into Hanyu's arms, to rest against the man's warm chest and feel himself folded into that boundless, undeserved care. He tilted forward a little, wondering dazedly if he was actually about to do it. Marcus's voice broke into his momentary insanity. "Does anyone know where Esau is?" Esau. Shit. Esau was with Thad. Who knew when they would be back? It could be any moment now, and the thought of sending Marcus away was worse than tearing off his own skin. Marcus can fix this. The thought came with such clarity that Antony realized he'd known it all along. Marcus could help him. He could hurt him until he stepped out of himself. Just a little time alone with his lover, and Antony would be able to bear this fear and uncertainty. He would be able to act decisively. But Esau could not find Marcus here. Whatever amends his lover was making to Hanyu, it was clearly too soon to try to make things right with Esau. If Antony could offer Hanyu's friend nothing else, he could at least make sure to keep them separated. Marcus had to go. Do I want to go with him? The question seemed to tear him in two. It would be horrible to leave Theo, who must be as full of grief and fear as he was, even if she didn't share his guilt. He had sworn he would never do that again. And the thought of leaving Hanyu was intolerable. Hanyu, who was kind and caring and so much better than Antony deserved. Hanyu would want to hold him and let him fix his hair. Hanyu would try to tell him that if something terrible had happened, it wasn't his fault. Hanyu would care for him and love him with no expectation of receiving love or care in return. He would do all that because he believed that Antony was a god, that the fact of his cursed existence made him into some glorious being that mortals could only worship with unstinting devotion, as if Antony were a thing deserving veneration. As if Antony were worth any more than the sea scum that clung to Hanyu's feet when he exercised above deck after a storm. He was evil, murderous dreck that had ruined his innocent baby brother's life and maybe killed him. And Hanyu was amazing and wonderful and gorgeous, and the thought of his adoration suddenly felt like 100 ants crawling on the underside of Antony's skin. Theo's supportive hand was no better. He destroyed her life and enslaved her friends, and all at once, Antony couldn't bear the care that she was extending him through her own fear. Can't you see how far beneath you I am? Can't you see that I don't deserve anything from you but scorn and hatred? How can you think you love me? How dare you love me? Antony lurched unsteadily to his feet, dropping Theo's hand and taking care not to step on Hanyu as he moved away from the sofa. He couldn't bring himself to look at either of their faces as he stumbled towards his lover. They should look after each other. They deserved each other. He deserved... "Let's go, Marcus," he rasped. Marcus's smile was gentle and unsurprised. He extended his massive arm and folded Antony tightly against his body. "Theo, we'll see you above when the sun goes down," Marcus said, the rumble of his voice filling Antony's head and blunting the clamor of his own mind just a little. "Hanyu, I'm sure I'll see you soon. Thank you for all your help." He was fulfilling his promise to make friends with Hanyu, and just for this one moment, Antony didn't want him to. He wanted his lover to be as awful and vicious and rancid as he was, so he wouldn't have to feel guilty about burdening him with his presence. But of course he couldn't say that. He just let himself be towed through the door, away from the people whose love he deserved so little. Marcus pulled him gently through the hall. He only paused when they came upon an unfamiliar human who dropped to the floor so quickly that Antony couldn't even try to guess his age. Antony was startled when Marcus addressed the bowing man. "I need you to carry a message. With your permission, Lord Antony, I think we should institute an order that no humans go ashore without your express command." "What?" Damn, his mind was working slowly. "Why?" "Humans never left the ship unaccompanied. Why bother making it a rule now?" "I would never speak ill of Lord Titus, but we don't know what conditions are like on his ship right now, and his crew aren't always the most Controlled, Marcus explained with another gentle squeeze of his shoulder. We have to be extra cautious, don't you think? Oh, of course, yes. That was good sense, and Antony was ashamed he hadn't thought of it himself. How could he have let his selfish fears about his brother blind him to the need to take care of the multitude of vulnerable men who depended on him for protection? Their safety should have been his priority, not his own stirred-up feelings. Chastened, he addressed the man at their feet. Yes, make sure everyone knows. The man stammered out his obedience, and they continued down the hall. Antony pressed closer to Marcus's side. What would I do without you? Oh, you'd be lost without me. Another squeeze. Almost as lost as I'd be without you, darling. When they got back to Marcus's rooms, Antony started shucking off his clothes without explanation or preamble. Marcus didn't ask any questions. He just went to the closet where he kept his tools. Neither of them spoke. Marcus was too busy, and Antony was too lost in gratitude for the stinging, the burning, the utter rightness of finally getting exactly what he deserved.